Hi, my name's Angela Casey and welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors, the podcast that explores Edinburgh's green spaces and the people in them. And I'm starting in a really cool place today. I've brought you to the Meadowbank Shopping Centre and I'm with podcast favourite Hetty Lancaster of Hetty's History Walks. We're in an area, Meadowbank, Abbeyhill, just outside the centre of town. So we're going to talk about industry, and it ties very nicely from the episode we did in Loch End Park, where we were looking across at the skyline, and we could see the old industrial buildings, some of which are still here. So, Hetty, standing in a car park here, welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors again.
Thank you very much for having me back. So we're here at the Meadowbank Shopping Centre, and I thought it'd be interesting to look at some of Edinburgh's industrial heritage. So I always think that when we're thinking about Edinburgh's history, we really don't think about its industrial heritage at all. Everyone very much focuses on, the City of Enlightenment or, the grave robbers or stuff like that. And actually, Edinburgh has a huge manufacturing and industrial heritage. Sometimes we refer to it as the 3 Bs, beer, biscuits and books.
Oh,
I suppose you could add banking to that, but it's not really a manufacturing industry, but it is another sort of sector. And industry has very much shaped Edinburgh. This is actually what I did my dissertation on, was how industrial development and transport networks particularly have shaped the city. The railways were really important in this. And so today we're very much going to be looking at the impact of the railways and the impact that they had on this particular area of the city. So it's very much a 19th century and into the 20th century. And I thought it'd just be nice to walk around here, around some of the back streets, look at some of the industrial buildings that remain. Lots of them have disappeared. And in fact, if we'd been standing here 100 years ago, where we're now looking at Sainsbury's, we would be looking at one of the biggest malting houses in Scotland. And that was a massive 7-storey malting house, the Moray Park maltings that belonged to William Younger's brewery.
I like that you've got a picture out so quickly in the podcast.
I love a picture.
I always enjoy the pictures. And of course, reminding everyone, I always put the links on.
Yes.
On the blurb of the podcast.
So one of the reasons I thought it would be interesting to start in this car park at the shopping centre is because I've got a great aerial photograph that was taken of Edinburgh, this area, just after the Second World War. So I think it's like 1949. And we'd be standing roughly about here, and we'd be surrounded by industrial buildings, tenements as well. So we've got, these tenements still remain. But some of these buildings remain, some of them don't. And it's fascinating because really these industries connected Edinburgh to the rest of the world. Like products from here just went everywhere. And I love that idea. And I thought we'll circle around, we'll come up near Easter Road and come back through the Abbeyhill colonies, which are also important to the industrial heritage of the area as well, actually.
So we are very close to Loch End Park here, actually, aren't we, from when we looked before? And I know you were saying about how important the railways were, and I do remember when we were in Loch End Park, in the Loch End Park butterfly, how we talked about how the whole area was just a mass of railways running backwards and forwards.
It's really difficult to imagine now just how smoky and how smelly Edinburgh would have been, and just about air pollution. So this is the old railway line, this main railway line that would come past there, which came from Powder Hall and would take out the rubbish from the incinerator. And so this was still working, definitely up until 2017.
Yeah.
So it's
very overgrown. There was a steelworks there, and I assume they used the railway for their transport.
Yes, of course, it was this amazing new transportation network. Everything before has been horses and carts, and suddenly railway comes along, and it means you can bring in massive quantities of raw materials, and you can take away lots of finished goods. Steam engines also allow you to move away from the water-powered mills. So through that way, we could get to Loch End Park. But just before that, I'm going to take us up here, and we're going to look at a lovely ghost sign up on the wall.
I like a ghost sign. And you don't always spot them, do you?
No, this is probably one of the bigger ones, actually, one of the more noticeable ones. This is actually the line of the railway, the road that it's following. And so this is James Dunbar. And so this is the back. of the James Dunbar aerated water factory.
Who was making aerated water?
So aerated water is what we would just now call soda or carbonated water.
Yeah.
And one of the very early names is Schweppes. In fact, that's one of the big names. But they're essentially, aerated water starts off. So I don't know if you ever watched any of those period dramas, and everyone's always going off to the mineral springs in the health spas of the day to drink the waters, because they thought these kind of like mineral waters were incredibly healthy. It was like a cure-all for everything at the date. And so basically aerated water, carbonated water, is trying to produce a kind of, not a synthetic aerated water, but a bottled alternative to the organic mineral waters that you would get in Bath or Harrogate or wherever, all these spa towns. And James Dunbar is one of the people in Edinburgh that comes along and does this. This is not his first factory. His first factory was actually at Maryfield, which is just at the top of Easter Road. The Dunbars. And Dunbars was really well known locally. So here, obviously, we're next to the Hib Stadium, the Easter Road Stadium. And this end, which is the sort of south end, this is the Way end, but it was always known as Dunbar's end because it's the one that's closest to the Dunbar's water factory. So along this street, we would have had, where all these new buildings are, this is where you would have had the St Andrews Steelworks. This is this aerial view from 2001. We've got Dunbar's factory there. We've got the Hib Stadium there. But none of these houses are here. Another bowling green. The road that we're standing on, or the road that we were sort of walking on, wasn't there. This is all the steelworks, the St Andrews Steelworks there. When I found this aerial view online, I just kind of went, wow, like 20 years and this area is transformed.
It's a great picture. So
one of the buildings that I want to look at, so I've been talking about the St Andrews Steelworks, and that was actually run by a company called Redpath Brown & Co. I think that's one of the nice things, actually, is that even in a city it's quite nice to get outdoors. Even if it's not a green space, there's actually quite a lot to look at, particularly in a city that's got so much history as Edinburgh.
yes.
So it's this really nice, this is a red sandstone building that was built in around about 1900, just a little bit later maybe. And this is the head office of Redpath Brown & Co., who owned St Andrews Steelworks. The Redpath Brown & Co. was actually started way back in the Old Town in the early 1800s by John Redpath and John Brown. And they were quite a simple ironmonger. Basically, they made tools and shovels and stuff like that.
Right.
And then the company really changes in the 1880s and the 1890s, and they start to focus on complex equipment, so like steel girders and stuff like this. And they actually end up being structural engineers. So they build these offices here around about 1900, which is when they developed the St Andrews Steelworks. And they were absolutely huge. They end up having plants in Glasgow, London, Manchester, so they actually become this huge national company. But you can still see a couple of things I love about this building.
Yeah.
We've got the lovely RB & Co. lettering above the door. Because it's an ironworks and a steelworks, they've got really decorative railings.
They're showing off their talent.
Showing off their talents, which I think was really nice. And also, you've noticed the two doors. So you've got the main office door, and I suspect that the listener door to the side was the workers' door, where they would all go in and clock in and go through to work. And this other lovely red sandstone building behind us, this is Norton Park School. And this was originally built, I think, about 1903, and it was the technical department of Leith Academy. Some of the board schools that pop up in Edinburgh after the Education Scotland Act in 1872, I want to say, which is when schooling becomes compulsory and you have to have board schools that are organised by the council. So a board school is essentially what we would call today a state school. So before we disappear down this road, because we're going to go down here actually, but I do want to just point out something. Standing in Albion Road, what you can see, and there's this plaque on the wall on the tenement up there, which says Hera Solitudo Hode Vicus Cras Civitas 1902. And what that means is yesterday solitude, today a village, tomorrow a city. And I think it's a really good, almost like a motto of what happens to this area. We're coming up to the Crawford Bridge. This is a much more modern footbridge.
And we're in Bothwell Street.
There's also slightly raised up, so if we go into these railings over here,
Yeah.
you'll look down onto Sunnyside. So this little road down here is a dead end called Sunnyside. So you've got like the Hibs supporters club down there. And in fact, one of the early Hibs football grounds was actually down here before these buildings were built and before they moved to what becomes the Easter Road Stadium. But we've got a lovely little bit of ghost signage down there. Robert Dickman, wholesale grocer and confectioner. So confectioner sometimes meant sweeties, but also meant biscuits. So that whole beer, biscuits and books. So that would have been
a shop front,
underneath there in little business halls. So obviously lots of industry in this area. This is one of the first big buildings to be built on Easter Road, and you can very, very faintly see some ghost signage at the top, which is difficult to read, but it says Andrew White and Son, and this was a stationer's warehouse, so he was supplying paper and stationery. Again, we kind of forget just how much stationery we needed, because now everything was on computer.
Yeah.
But before, all your accounts were kept in account books and all your double entry accounting books and notebooks and textbooks, and lots of businesses just had these huge amounts of paperwork. And so stationery was a huge, huge industry. And one of these kind of subsidiary books bit, I guess. The beer, biscuits and books. The books includes all the wider sort of publishing related industries. So this is now known as Bothwell House. So this is now all residential. So sometimes when you look at some of the earlier maps, you'll see there's one kind of big building on Easter Road, and it's that. Because the tenements on Easter Road are surprisingly late, so they don't really start until about the 1890s. You'd expect them to be a little bit earlier than that, but not.
And I guess when you think about it, Easter Road is nothing to do with Easter.
You're absolutely right. Yeah, so there were two main roads between Edinburgh Old Town and the Portaleith. You had the East Road, which is Easter Road, and what we now call Leith Walk, but that was originally called West Road.
Ah.
So it was the Wester Road and the Easter Road.
Yeah.
So you're right, nothing to do with the time of year.
No. So we're coming onto Easter Road now, which is the busy road.
It is.
So there's a lot of traffic now.
Has been the main road between the Canongate and the Port of Leith for a long, long time. So it's still very busy.
So we've now stepped off Easter Road, thankfully, because it's quite noisy, into Edina Place.
A diner or a dina is basically a Latinised form of Edinburgh. So people like the poet Robert Ferguson, who's the statue that you see in the Canongate Kirk. He was a local Edinburgh. So we're on Diner Place. We've got Scotmid on the corner, the cooperative, the Scotmid cooperative. What's really interesting is that the very first shop to be there, when Easter Road is developed with tenements in the beginning of the 1900s, originally it was the Norton Park Cooperative, and then it gets built over by the St Cuthbert's Cooperative, and then now it's the Scotmid Cooperative. So I love the fact that it's always been a cooperative. The early cooperatives did lots more than just food. They would do things like clothing and things as well.
Oh, what's this building then?
So this is a fabulous purpose-built printing works. So this was built in about 1876 for the W&A.K. Johnson's map makers extraordinaire. Now housing, so we'll not wander in.
It says please don't go in, but I'm just going to nip in to take a photo. Sure. They won't mind. Actually, it looks like a print works, doesn't it?
It does. So they moved here in 1879, so this was one of the first, not the first, which is one of the things that is encouraging businesses to come to these areas near the railway lines, because there's space to build these wonderful purpose-built properties in a way that you can't do that in the Old Town. In the Old Town, you're quite restricted, which is where most of the industry had been. If you weren't in a mill along the Water of Leith, or you weren't in the Port of Leith, you were likely in the Old Town. This is quite nice. It's quite decorative, although it's brick. We've got some nice different coloured brickwork giving a bit of decoration. We've got a decorated cornice, I guess you would call it.
So we're walking around this area, obviously big industry. It's not New Town or Old Town. Why, and I suppose when did it develop into this big industrial centre that it did? How did that happen?
In the 19th century particularly, Edinburgh Old Town becomes almost like an industrialised slum because it's so full of industry and so overcrowded. With the arrival of the Industrial Revolution and the arrival of the railways particularly, what you get in Edinburgh is this expansion of the city with these industrialised suburbs towards the east and the west of the city. And that is largely because the railways follow this kind of east-west trajectory through the city centre because of the topography and the landscape.
Yeah, because we've got hills and we've got a river.
Yeah, so you end up with these quite industrialised areas to either side, the east and the west. So here in the east, you've got places like Abbeyhill, Meadowbank. Portobello had quite a lot of industries. Obviously, you've got the branch lines of the railway going off to join onto the Port Elise. And then to the west of the city, of course, you're going out past Fountain Bridge, Gorgie, Dalry, Slateford, and they become really industrialised as well. So I think this is in some ways why Edinburgh doesn't really have that posh West End, working class East End type of thing, because our topography doesn't really allow for that. So what we tend to have, and this is a massive generalisation, but we tend to have these more industrialised workers' areas to the east and west of the city centre, and then to the north and the south, where you don't really have any of those railways particularly, is where you have more open green affluent areas with the villas, so places like Trinity or Inverleith, and then to the south you've got like the Grange and Morningside. So the railways do really influence how the city is shaped and where the population distribution goes. And you can kind of see that as well with the football teams. So the two football teams, and football in Britain has always been associated as a sort of like a working man's sport. And it's Hearts and Hibs, which are in the west and the east of the city, and in the industrialised heartland, I guess you might say. I mean, as much as we don't really think of Edinburgh as being a very heavy industry city, that is definitely the most industrialised areas. And that's where the football teams are, both founded in the 1870s, height of the Industrial Revolution. And then to the north and the south of the city, you tend to find more of the rugby clubs and the cricket clubs, which again is generally sort of a more middle-class, affluent sport. So the railways arrive into Edinburgh originally in 1842, where they come from the west, and they stop at Princes Street Station, which was behind what is now the Caledonian Hotel. And then from the east they come in 1846, and the train from London to Berwick is then extended up to Edinburgh, and so into the east side of Edinburgh. And then after that you get the expansion of the railway lines, and you start getting all the branch lines coming through in the 1860s and the 1870s. And one of the reasons that Edinburgh has so many train lines is we had two competing train companies. So we have the Caledonian coming in from the west, and we have the North British coming in from the east, reflected in the two hotels either end of Princes Street, which of course the North British Railway Hotel, which is now the Balmoral, and the Caledonian Hotel, which was owned by the Caledonian Railway Company.
Which changes its name every few years, so I don't
Waldorf,
actually know what it's called.
Whatever it's called, no.
I think it's gone back to being the Caledonian, hasn't it?
I think it is. But it's too big a name to lose, so even I think we always call it the Waldorf Caledonian, because the Balmoral is now owned by Rococo Forte, but it's always just known as the Balmoral, because but it is the North British. It is the North British originally.
Yeah, it happened. I mean, and also I know when I was up in Granton, there was the same, that when you got to the pier, which took the trains over to Fife, there were trains coming in from the east and trains coming in from the west. Yeah. So it's really this coming in from two different sides.
So the map that we were looking at of the railway companies, you've got the blue. The blue is the North British and the red is the Caledonian. And so basically they kind of come in from one side, and then they all want to benefit from Leith. So they all just put extra lines. So Edinburgh has a lot of lines.
It does.
More than it kind of needs. And we do also have a tiny, tiny little one here just over at Granton, which was the Duke of Buccleuch, basically doing it for coal. He was bringing in coal from his coal fields. So we've got this lovely lawn in front of the Edina Printworks here. So apparently this was a little putting green for golf. Oh. They also had a little golf club for the blokes.
A little more delicate than bowling,
but
maybe.
The Edina Printworks were owned by these brothers called William and Alexander Keith Johnson, and become W&AK Johnson's map makers. And they are premier map makers. They are incredible. Their maps get all over the world. This is where lots of them were printed. I guess the other big name in maps in Edinburgh is Bartholomew's. Bartholomew's and Johnson's are the two key companies. At the end, that we can't see from the trees, there's a white house past there. That was the manager's house.
We're now going down the alleyway.
Yeah, there's no name for this alleyway. So lots of other industries in this area. So Alexander Goskirk's electroplaters, Carrick and Ritchie's engineering works, would have had the glass works.
I'm just looking at this drying green.
So I was doing a tour around the Abbeyhill colonies, and this guy came up and chatted to me, and he was saying that he was brought up here, and his parents used to work or his dad used to work for the glassworks, which by that point was Edinburgh Crystal. And this was a tied tenement.
So we've
more noisy.
got a bit more traffic. We've come up Norton Park and we're on Rossi Place.
Rossi Place.
And these are the colonies.
Yeah, so we've got the ends of the colonies here, the Abbeyhill colonies, or originally these were called the Norton Park colonies, sometimes also called the Maryfield colonies, confusingly enough.
And I noticed when I was coming along that at the London Road end, you come down steps into them, so you can't drive into them or anything. You can only get into them from this end. And of course, there'd have been no cars originally.
Yeah.
They'd have been playgrounds.
So London Road is quite built up as well to provide a nice gradient. So it's quite built up, and the ground either side was slightly sunken away, partly because it was quite wet, which is one of the reasons why there wasn't a road originally going along London Road. That was a new road that was built in about the 1820s type of time, and previously you'd got to Russellrigg by coming down Easter Road and then swinging around.
Right.
So we've got the colonies here. So the colonies are really fascinating.
Yeah, I only found out recently this thing that when you're on Waverley Place, those are your numbers, but you're opposite Regent Place.
Yes. So this makes perfect sense when you think that when they were building the colonies, they build a terrace at a time. So it's the building that is numbered and not the street. And also because you have lower colonies on one side, where the main door is on the ground level. Around the other side, you have the upper colonies where access is up one of the stairs. And so what you have is very clear here, actually, we're looking at the numbering there. So this is Regent Place. So you have 1 to 22 Regent Place from the top down to the bottom, and then you go round the other side and you have 23 to 45 upper colonies around the other side. So here you'd think that these two should be the same street, but what you actually have is you have 24 Waverley Place is opposite 22 Regent Place, which is incredibly confusing.
Particularly if you're DPD.
Particularly if you're DPD. Also, because every year the Abbeyhill colonies host this Colony of Artists arts festival, and I do these walking tours and we chat about that because everyone is looking at the map and going, I have no idea where I'm supposed to be. So the Abbeyhill colonies are also full of murals. There's lots of murals in this area, and this one here particularly looks at the industry, which is quite hard to see because people are often parked in front of it. But we've got, something about the Edinburgh Crystal, we've got the railway lines, Moray Park maltings. So reflecting the industrial heritage of this particular area, but it is quite difficult to see from here.
I wonder if there was a hierarchy thing, like is it better to be at an upper one or a lower one?
So the upper ones are slightly bigger.
Oh, they've got 2 floors.
Because you can go into the attic space. What I really like is that you have these little terraces with the gable ends and the spaces between them, and it brings a very domestic proportion to the street. So the streetscape would be completely different if this street was lined either side with tenements, in comparison to having these nice open gable ends. And you see this in a lot of the colonies. So Edinburgh has some different colonies, but there's a whole series of 11 different colony sites that were all built by the Edinburgh Cooperative Building Company between the 1860s and the 1910s, 1920s type of era, basically. And they're all around the outskirts of Edinburgh. When they're being built, they are very much on the outskirts of Edinburgh. So Stockbridge are the first. You've got some up at Hawthorne Bank, up near Ferry Road in Leith. You've got some at Abbeyhill here, and then you've got places like Dalrye. We've got ones in Slateford. Not all of them are like this. The early ones follow this pattern of having the upper and lower colonies, which basically was this benefit to trying to provide good quality workers' accommodation. And this design, this kind of stacked design of a lower colony and then with an upper colony, meant that each one got its own front door and its own garden. And then they also had amenities like piped cold water and indoor lavatories, which, when these were being built, unheard of for urban workers in Britain, really. Much, much better than being in a tenement as well.
And is this style, with the upside on one and the downside on the other, is this an Edinburgh style or is this seen in other places?
Not really. It's pretty much just an Edinburgh thing.
Right.
You do get some other examples, and this isn't the only example of workers' housing, but these kind of colonies are definitely reasonably unique to Edinburgh. The Edinburgh Cooperative Building Company are really interesting. There's a wonderful book called Happy Homes by Richard Roger, who's a local professor, and that's the history of the Edinburgh Cooperative Building Company and the Edinburgh Colonies. But they're really interesting. They're quite innovative with what they're doing with the buildings. They're very canny about how they get the land. They're very understanding about the fact that, because it's basically all funded by workers for workers, and they introduce a very early form of mortgage. You can buy shares in the company using instalments, which means it's affordable for working families. So there's lots of really interesting things. And each of the colonies around Edinburgh are all slightly different as well, actually. So there are sort of slight differences. Just as the economy changes and, you know, different things change, so they adapt. So it's really interesting. It might be interesting just to do a podcast about that one time, because
do
they are.
Colonies podcast.
I'm not quite sure we'd get to go to every single one. But
we'd have to race round a bit, but we could go to some others, go to some quieter ones. I notice we're at the end here now, and then there's the last one, because they obviously had to have something at the end. They've just put houses.
So these are colony buildings, and then we've got a tenement further up. But basically, behind here, where these trees are, that's again the railway line.
Right.
So these colonies were very much, and you can't, I think that's some of what's going on.
They were part of the
side of
oh
that.
yes, look at that.
And you can see the Meadowbank Retail Park just over there, the roofs. Back in the day, that would have been the London Road Iron Foundry. Again, one of the first things to move to this area, which was, again, a massive foundry, which used to be, its furnace was going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
When I was doing my research for today, which is not extensive when I'm seeing you because you tell me everything, but I found a really interesting article online all about the cooperative society, and then I got to the end and it said by Hetty Lancaster.
I think that was probably the building together booklet. So one of the things people always ask me about whenever I do tours of this area is, are the dormer windows original? And I never quite know.
Some of them look like they've had troubles and they've had new frames put in and things. They're quite high up, the top bits, and actually because we're going up a hill, they're getting higher.
Yes, pretty much everywhere Edinburgh is built on slopes, and so everything is stepped. But yes, it's really nice. You've got a little coal cellar under the stair.
Some of the pictures that I saw online, some of which I think you had, there were loads of kids playing.
Really nice. It's one of the points that Richard Roger makes in his book about the colonies, actually, is how the fact that the colonies, because they have these almost cul-de-sac streets, they really give these safe places to stay, safe places for children. And you can overlook your neighbours the whole time as well. But this fosters this kind of sense of community and a kind of collective identity, which I would arguably say that a lot of the colonies have today. So the Abbeyhill colonies, the Stockbridge colonies, I think the Flower colonies in Dalry also have these little community groups and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. So I think people definitely have a kind of sense of identity about living in the colonies now, and I assume they also did then as well.
We're going to stop beneath the noisy Magpie near the pub, just below London Road, so it's a little bit noisy still. But that was really interesting. I enjoyed that. It was a snapshot of what you would take people on a tour, is that right?
Yeah, so I do a sort of 2-hour tour which sort of looks at the industrial buildings that are left, looks in more detail at what those industries actually were, what they were producing, the kinds of people who were working there, how this area developed overall. So yes, if people are sort of interested to hear more, they can come on those. They'll be running later in the summer, bookable on Eventbrite.
I came on one and I brought some friends who were staying with us, and we really enjoyed it.
Oh, good.
It was great.
Yeah, always nice to get good feedback.
Yeah.
So I've developed them for residents, but I think if people are generally interested in history, it is suitable for anybody, and it's just nice doing something that's out of the centre of town. So that's what I really wanted to do with my local history walks, was do stuff that was away from the Royal Mile and the busy centre. So we do ones out to the New Town, out to Inverleith. I would love to do one of Leith. I've done private tours of Leith, but I would really like to have a local history.
It's an interesting place, I think.
It's a very interesting place.
And I've loved seeing these colonies, and along the lines of the one that we did in Stockbridge last year, I love that we went round and we've spotted things in plain sight that we all walk past every day. Not that I do walk through here, but, you know, things that people walk past every day.
So there's always something new to see. And I think that's one of the things that's nice about getting outside in Edinburgh. It's not just about the green spaces, which are lovely. There's also quite a lot to catch your eye and keep it interesting, even in the urban streets as well.
No, we've seen a lot. We haven't had much bird song today. We just had that magpie. We've had to contend with quite a lot of bin lorries and people, lots of delivery drivers doing U-turns just as we're talking about something. I've really enjoyed it, and it's lovely poking around the colonies, which I've not really done before. Great, well thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me back. It's always a pleasure to do these. Really, really enjoyable for me as well.
Yep.
I hope everyone enjoys listening to our sometimes slightly rambling conversations.
I always enjoy a chat with Hetty, and I love walking around actually the industrial spaces and contending with a lot of noise, but also just extending on from when we were in Loch End Park and seeing what's still around and then having a lovely poke around the colonies, which are fascinating. I like them. And as always, thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please rate it, and don't forget to tell your friends and colleagues about it too. And if you know of an outdoor space in or around Edinburgh that might like to be featured, please get in touch.